you will all going to learn about the price control, which is related to the price selling, which is one of the situation in the market, and how to control and what are the factors, what are the inefficiencies that involved in the market relevant to a price ceiling. So let's begin with in today's session about all these to study upon. So let's begin what is market and why and how the market become inefficient. Market become inefficient if there are plenty of missed opportunities. Like for example, some people could be made a profitable or a revenue or gain without making other people's to get any chance to buy or worse off. That's called the market is said to be inefficient. But what was the reasons behind it when such situation arises? It's in under the case of price ceiling and how it could be controlled. So these are the various issues or inefficiencies involved in the market when it comes to charging a higher prices by a seller to the ultimate consumer. So the first point is inefficient allocation to consumers. Second is wasted resources. Third is inefficiently low quality. And the last one is black market. So let's begin a theoretical explanation in detail about these all inefficiencies. So the first is inefficient allocation to consumers. Price ceiling is one of the situations where the seller charges a higher price to the ultimate consumers. So this is one of the issue in the market for the consumers when they are actually willing to buy a good at a higher prices and they will not get it exactly, and those who are really not interested and want to buy a particular good and willing to pay the price at a or at a low level, actually they get it. So that's such a situation called inefficient allocation to consumers, and this is also called an inefficiency which occurs in case of price ceiling. So inefficient allocation to consumer, the exact meaning of this particular term is the people who actually want the good and willing to pay at a high prices, they don't actually get the good, and those who are really not interested and willing to pay the low price, they actually get it the good. And that situation, that inefficiency called the inefficient allocation of resources to consumers. If we talk about the efficient allocation situation comes in the market, so and such differences occur, so automatically those who really want the good they actually get it, and though doesn't need it even on an urgent basis, they don't even get a chance to get such goods, and that's called the efficient allocation of resources. Those actually need a good, they get it. Those who don't interested to buy a good even on an urgent basis, they don't actually get such goods. So, for example, under such inefficiency, let's talk about an apartment or a flat in an apartment. So, usually they get it through their personal connections or their luck basis, and that's this is one of the example of inefficient allocation to consumers, that those who really want a flat they don't get it. So what they do, they will get it on a luck basis or they will have any personal connections to take a rent a flat in an apartment. So if they have a personal connections or their luck works, then definitely they will get a flat in an apartment. So such scenario or such situation is called inefficient allocation to consumers. The next inefficiency or issue of price ceiling, that's called wasted resources. people exactly more willing to spend money, their time, their efforts, how they expend their efforts to deal such as shortages, which shortage of resources, which has been caused by a price ceiling. But actually, there is a situation when people lost their timing, their energy, their money, there are plenty of efforts in case of the shortages of resources, and what they do, they have a chance to get a rest. They don't have any work, or they just waiting for their own luck that anything good arises, but actually they can't find anything which works exactly for them, and that's called the wasted resources. That exactly the resources basically are not exactly available to you can say for the people so that they can survive, or you can say utilize their basic amenities in their own life. So as a result, they are actually what they are wasted. They are wasted their time, they are wasted their energy, they are wasted their efforts when it comes to a shortage or to deal with a shortage of resources. So either they could rest, they could work, they could do something more better for their own life, and even if they can't find anything to work upon it. So if the in other on other hand, if the market works efficiently, so they can quickly find their work, they quickly find their job of what they are actually looking for, and that's called the market is said to be efficient in case of wasted resources. They can easily find quickly the work, the good they are actually looking for. So that's a exact theoretical explanation of the wasted resources, which is said to be in one of the inefficiency of the price ceiling. The next one is inefficiently low quality. So, if we talk about inefficient low quality, so even the sellers in this particular scenario, sellers are offering low quality goods at a low prices, and ultimately the buyers would buy it as they wanted, the those who really wanted the goods at a lower prices. But what about those buyers who prefer a high quality good at a higher prices? And that's called the inefficiently low quality for those buyers who actually want a higher quality, but they don't get it even they are willing to pay a higher prices. But in case, let's take an example, in case of rent control, the landlords even not even for taking up or for the rent works, the landlords not even improve the conditions of the apartment. They don't even take any incentives so that the rental fees could become low as there is a shortage of resources. So as a result, people who are actually willing to rent the flat as even in a bad condition, they do it. They actually do it, and that's called an inefficient low quality. So those people who are ready to rent their flat, they actually rent it even it is in a bad condition. Even the particular you can say no incentives will be given to those, even if the rental fees is low in case of the you can see buyers, and as a result, in such scenario, the low quality, even for the flats who are being rented, are in even bad being works illegally, even not in the selling and buying of the goods and services, even for when it comes to the apartment, when it's come to renting a flat in an apartment, and with some of the buyers given extra money like bribes in some way, so automatically the flat owners are always being ready to give their flat on rent. But in case of the honest people, they are not ready to break such the law, and they will find an other alternatives, an easy way in a legal way to find a flat on the rent basis. So this is the inefficiencies, the four inefficiencies where the particular buyer has to deal with it, and accordingly they will find the possible outcomes to get a particular, you can see, alternatives or best opportunities in the market through a legal process or a legal way. So this is the four inefficiencies which has been discussed in the particular slides today. Now we talk about the next concept, that is the price flow. This is one of the situation where you can see the seller charge a minimum price and the buyer are ready to pay such minimum price for a good. And that situation is called price floors. So price floor is a minimum price a buyers are required to pay for a good. If they pay for a good a minimum price, that's called the price floor. If they are not paying a minimum price and they are paying a very high price or the maximum price, it called a price ceiling, right? So price floor is just pay a minimum price. It's called price floor. But when you talk about the case of the price floor, we talk about the minimum wage. Minimum wage is a legal floor on the wage rate. So when it comes to the workers and the particular factory owners, they pay the wages to the workers. Or if they pay the minimum wage, so that's called the legal floor on the wage rate, which is exactly the market price of a labor. So whatever the market price of a labor, and they termed as a and paying the minimum wage to the factory workers, and that's called the legal flow on the wage rate basis, and that's called the price. That's called the exact concept of the price flow. So when it comes to the example of the price flow, we always talk about the minimum wage rate. In other words, it is also called the legal flow, which is exactly refers to the market price of a labor. Let's talk about the diagrammatic presentation of the price control. That means the one of the alternative is price flows. So if to conclude the graphical representation, it has always been understand that price flow, it will be decided in the market, and what would be the equilibrium, you can say, point where the demand and supply intersect each other. So when we talk a quantity demanded, we can talk about the 200 units, and when we talk about the price, we are talking about the price is three. That is, these particular units or the price has been taken or has been considered based on the assumptions. So this is not the fixed that this values will be considered as a fixed quantity demanded and the price. No, in the market it could change according to the time period, or you can consider any of the values, whether it could be 4, it could be 2, it could be any one. But in this particular graphical representation, it has been assumed that 200 units or 3 quantity, the price of a quantity has been considered. So when the demand and supply, which is in the supply is a positive slope and demand is a negatively or downward slope. So when these two curves, demand curve and supply curve, intersect each other, that intersect point, that is E, called then equilibrium or a market equilibrium point. And based on the market equilibrium, we just drive the price flow, you can see diagrammatic presentation. So if you look at the section B diagram of the price flow, so the equilibrium point, just drag a line of the equilibrium point, and that point will be always been an equilibrium point under the price floor graphical representation, where the demand and supply will always be in and intersect each other, and that would be the market equilibrium point. So when we talk about the demand curve, which is downward sloping, and the supply curve, which is a positive slope, where the intersection point is E, the same price and the same quantity will be considered. But now we need to add on a price flow price. So price flow, which has been shown over there, when you talk about the price ceiling, there will be a shortage, which is the you can say below the equilibrium point. For any horizontal line which is below the equilibrium point, that's called the price ceiling point. But when we talk about that any particular line which has been a price fixed, which is a minimum price line, and which is above the market equilibrium point, that line, that particular price which has been fixed, that is the minimum price line, where it shows that the supply has been in a shortage and the demand is more than the quantity supplied. So when the demand is more than the quantity supplied, there is a situation arises, and that's called the surplus situation, which has been shown in the diagram, which is called you can say the point D in S. So the particular difference between the demand and supply curve on the particular fixed minimum price line, and the gap between the demand and supply, that's called the surplus point, which is denoted by D and S. So when we talk about the D point, where the quantity supply has been decreased, it's below the equilibrium quantities, that is 200 to 100 units. When we talk about the quantity demanded, which has been increased from 200 to 600 units. So when there is a situation where the quantity demanded is more than the quantity supplied, that the surplus situation occurs in the market. That means the demand for a particular goods is more than the quantity supplied. And as a result, if the surplus situation arises, that particular scenario will be called as price flow. If any line or any particular you can say point which is above the you can say the equilibrium point, that situation is called the surplus situation in the market, where demand is more than supply, and that called a particular theoretical framework of the price flow. So this is the graphical representation where such price flow will be decided in the market and based on the market equilibrium point. So you can see if there is any surplus situation occurs, which denotes a point DS. That's called the surplus situation, where the demand and supply has demand is more than supply. A minimum price will be charged so that the buyers are required to pay to buy a good. So that's called the graphical representation of the price flow. So before there is automatically, if we talk about the price flow, if I have spoken or you can say explained earlier also, the price ceiling has several inefficiencies. So accordingly, there is a new concept where the price flow works. So there also the inefficiencies occur. So the two main important efficiencies: inefficient allocation of sales among seller. So it is a minimum price, so automatically the sales would get increased and particular of goods will be bought by the buyers. So price flow leads to inefficient allocation of sales among sellers. So those who are willing to sell the goods at a lower price are not always those who actually manage or sell it. So those sellers who are actually willing to sell a particular good at a low price, it doesn't mean that the whole goods will be sold off in the market, or the buyers are exactly always be required to pay such price, low quality price at a low price. So that not being acceptable. So if it is not acceptable and the buyer can't manage or sell it off the all goods at a lower price, and that situation is called inefficient allocation of sales among sellers. So the next inefficiency is the wasted resources. Like it is also likewise a similar case of the price ceiling. So a price floor is also causes the inefficiency by wasting resources. Like it's a wastage. Resources not about the materials, it's not about the equipments, the resources for exactly for a buyers and seller, it is a money, time, efforts are all wasted resources for exactly for all of them who actually willing to sell a particular flat or to rent a particular flat in an apartment or to sell a particular goods and services to the ultimate consumers. So same also in particular in the price ceiling, the buyers you can say face such situation, but in the price floor the sellers are actually facing such situation. Why? Because sellers are actually wasting their time, money, energy, and even efforts to sell their goods at a low prices. So there is a difference between the price selling. Here, in particular price selling, buyers face a situation of such wasting resources, inefficient allocation of resources. But in case of the price flow, sellers are the those who are exactly or actually facing such situation in case of selling the goods at a minimum price or the lowest price and wasting and sellers money, you can say time, efforts, and energy is all wasted resources for them, as they are not able to manage and sell off that particular goods at the lowest or a lower price to the ultimate consumers. So that's the two main inefficiencies of the price flow, that why the price flow causes inefficiency. So these are the two most important points, that is inefficient allocation of sales among sellers and wasted resources. The next concept is arbitrage. So, what is arbitrage in the you can say economics point of view? So, if we talk about the arbitrage, is a simultaneously trading or or a selling and buying of any you can say currencies or commodities or securities and other financial institutions in various market, whether it could be the perfect market, it could be you can say imperfect market or a pure market or a monopolistic or oligopoly markets. So what the in particular in this arbitrage process, arbitrager buys a particular good in one market and simultaneously sells into another market. That's called the arbitrage process. When it comes to the arbitrage process, it automatically the arbitrager you can say deals with the financial instrument. The financial instruments could be any instruments, like we talk about the shares, we talk about the bonds or any mutual funds product, insurance products, where the particular contract is to be made between the various companies so that the people could buy and sells the particular commodities, or you can say financial products in the market. So basically, if the one person buys the good in the one market, the same person simultaneously sell the same good or another good in the another market. and that's called the arbitrage process. So automatically, when we talk about arbitrage process in this, if a particular arbitrator buys a good in one market and sell the good in the another market, so there may be a chances of marginal price differences. So it cannot be said that, so if okay, I buy one good in one market and simultaneously sell into another market, but I cannot decide it could be sell off at the same price or not. It could be a marginal price differences. So if I buy 1200 rupees or invest 1200 rupees to buy a good, and immediately simultaneously I sell the same good into another market, let's say 1198 rupees. So it would be a marginal price differences, the differences of 2 rupees. So that's called the arbitrage process, where a particular, you can say, buyers, or you can say buy, and he can sell. If he can do that, then that exact process called arbitrage process. So basically, when we talk about, there is no judicial process would be required, or there is no even any settlement of disputes would be possible. As if I buy a good, I sell the good. So that's the ultimate process of arbitrage, you can say, case. So when we talk about arbitrage case, it is a full-fledged, it is a full hatch process where we talk about the risk-free transaction. There is no risk when we talk about the arbitrage process, and there is always a secure transaction is to be done in the market. So even arbitrage plays a very important and significant role when it talks about maintaining the liquidity and efficiencies in the markets. So that's called the arbitrage concept, and it's what exactly the buyers and sellers do in such process. This is a diagrammatic presentation to make you more understand about this concept. Arbitrage trading. So when we talk about arbitrage trading, so this is the two stock exchanges markets, the New York Stock Exchanges and the London Stock Exchanges. If one consumers buy a London Stock Exchange, so definitely he could sell the more and more New York Stock Exchanges, share exchanges in that particular market. So when these two stock exchanges, where the buying and selling process would work, that's called the arbitrage trading. So if we talk about, so if we Bombay stock shares, you can say sell in New York Stock Exchanges or London, and that exactly called the arbitrage trading process, where the one particular seller or buyer, they sell both in New York also, in London Stock Exchange also. So that's called the arbitrage process. So here, a particular arbitrator might simultaneously buy shares at a low price in London Stock Exchange and sell them high price in the New York Stock Exchange. So that's called the exact concept. And of course, they perform the simultaneously actions, and that exactly called the arbitrage trade, where if a person buy the shares of London Stock Exchange at low price and sell them at a higher price in a New York Stock Exchanges, that's called arbitrage trade process, where the arbitrator performs very, you can say, simultaneously actions together, and very secure transactions is to be done between both London Stock Exchange and New York Stock Exchanges, where the buying and selling of shares take place in such market, and that's called the London and New York stock exchanges. And that particular process of selling and buying of shares at a low and high prices into in the market, that's called the arbitrage trade process. Now we talk about the another most important concept, that is a text pattern, that how the particular in the markets where the demand and supply are perfectly elastic or perfectly inelastic, what would be the shape of demand curve, and in what scenario, in what basis, and where the demand and supply shifts when the tax would imposed in the particular market, or tax will imposed to the consumers. So this is the exact cases of four main cases of sharing of tax burden when the demand is perfectly elastic and supply is of normal shape. When demand is perfectly inelastic and supply is of normal shape. The third case is when supply is perfectly elastic and demand is of normal shape, and when supply is perfectly inelastic and demand is of normal shape. So let's talk about the first case when demand is perfectly elastic and the whole tax pattern will be borne by the producer himself. So in this particular first case, producer is plays a very significant role to bear the tax in the particular markets. So if we talk about the diagram, as I can see that demand is perfectly elastic. That means the shape of the demand curve is in on horizontal line, which denotes that means price is equal to demand. When we talk about the supply curve, that is SS or namely SS, which is a positive sloping curve or upward sloping, that's called the supply curve. So when the tax is imposed by the government, then demand will remain unchanged, but the supply will shift backward or leftward shift, and a new supply curve will drive, which named S1 S1, and that's a result why the supply curve shifts leftward, just because the tax has been imposed to the producer in the market. As a result, the new equilibrium curve or point has been derived, that is E1. So whatever the difference of the equilibrium point, a new equilibrium point, and the point where the original supply curve cuts a new quantity demand line, that point stands R, and whatever the difference between the ER, that's called the tax per unit. That means whatever the producer sells goods, a tax will be imposed on per unit of products. So that's called the case of when demand is perfectly elastic and supply is of normal shape. So when the tax is imposed, automatically it shifts to the leftward, and whatever the new quantity demanded and supplied curves, that the difference of the points, that is ER, that's points are called the tax per unit. Why? Because it has been shifted just because of the tax has been imposed by the government to the producer, and the producer has a whole responsibility to bear the tax, and that's the main reason the demand is perfectly elastic rather than inelastic. So when we talk about the second case, when the demand is perfectly inelastic and the supply is of normal shape. So this is the second case when the demand is perfectly inelastic and the whole tax burden will be borne by the consumer. As why it is borne, or why the consumer should bear such tax, because as the price rises, so the full amount of tax will be charged on such goods, and that's the main reason consumer will bear such tax. So let's look up the diagram over here, that the demand is perfectly inelastic. When we talk about inelastic, what would be the shape of the demand curve? It stands vertical. It means there is no change in the quantity demanded and quantity demanded at all, but there is a change in the quantity supplied, and as well as due to a shifts in the prices. So if you look up the diagram, the SS is the original supply curve. This is a supply curve where no tax has been imposed. When the government has imposed a taxes to the consumers, then automatically the prices will up, and ultimately when the prices will goes up, the supply curve will shifts to the leftward, or you can say inward shift of the supply curve, that is called the new supply curve, namely S1 S1. This supply curve shifts as because the taxes has been imposed by the government, and due to a differences, whatever the differences of the equilibrium point, that is E to E1, that differences is called tax per unit, and as a result, the automatically consumers are the exact ultimatum where they have to bear the whole tax whatever they buy the goods, and on buying the goods they have to pay the whole tax on such goods. And of course, uh, the prices rises by a full amount of tax. So whatever the tax amount would be there, the prices will be raised by the same amount. So that's the exact scenario graphical representation of the where the demand is perfectly inelastic, and the whole tax burden will be borne, or is borne by the consumers. The next two cases is when the supply is perfectly elastic and the whole tax burden is borne by the consumer. So this is also the third particular case where supply, not demand, supply is perfectly elastic. So automatically, as you can see, when supply is perfectly elastic, the shape of the supply becomes horizontal, and when tax is imposed, you can see by the government, then of course the particular consumer has to bear the tax amount along as the prices rises from P to P1. As the tax has been imposed, the prices will go up, and automatically the supply will also shifts to upward, or there is an upward shifts in the supply curve from S to S1, and whatever the differences of the original and the new supply curve, that difference, that is RE, is called the tax per unit. So when the tax has been imposed, there automatically the supply curve has been shift upward, and the demand curve will remain the same, which is downward sloping. So when the supply and demand cuts the original and the new equilibrium point, that's called equilibrium points or market equilibrium points, namely E and E1. So the difference between the R, E, that difference is called tax per unit. As a result, automatically, if the you can say supply will remain unchanged, supplies remain unchanged, so automatically the quantity will decrease as the prices will goes up, as the prices will goes up, to automatically the quantity will decrease, and ultimately it is due to the tax burden only. So this is the third case where the supply is perfectly elastic and the whole tax burden borne by the seller. Then we talk about the last case when the supply is perfectly inelastic and the whole tax burden is borne by the seller. This is due, that means the supply, you can see curve is perfectly inelastic. That means it is a vertical shape where the supply and quantity will remains, you can say, constant. That means the quantity supplied will remains constant, and you can say demand curve it's downward sloping. So automatically the price will remains fixed in case of the supply is perfectly inelastic, where whatever the tax burden will be borne by the seller. So whatever the taxes will be imposed to the seller, it is before the tax period, which is not no tax has been imposed, and after the tax has been imposed, both rates will become equal as the demand and supply will intercept each other and equilibrium point will be the same and price will remains fixed. So when there is a change in the taxes, prices will also change. But in this particular case, the price will remain constant as the supply is unchanged. So as a result, whatever the taxes positions would be there. There is no change in the taxes position, it remains equal. The pre-tax position is equal to the post-tax position. If you look out the three earlier cases of the tax burden, the taxes, the positions of the tax rates will become changed due to the differences of RE, due to the earlier case of E to E1, R to E1, that is tax per rate difference, and there also a tax rate difference, that is E1 to R. So why? Because it happens because the demand has perfectly elastic or inelastic, or supply is perfectly elastic. So when the supply is perfectly elastic and demand is perfectly elastic, or the demand is perfectly elastic, then there is a shifts in the supply curves. But when we talk about the supplies become inelastic, then automatically there is no change in the tax position, and ultimately everything will be borne by the seller, whatever the tax would be rate. There is no change in the prices when the supply is perfectly inelastic. So the tax, pre-tax and the post-tax will remains equal, as there is no change in the equilibrium points, there is no shifts in the supply curves, there is no shifts in the price as well, or there is no shifts in the quantity demanded as well. So as a result, the positions of the tax pre and post will become equal. So this is the last important point of this session, that is the minimum wage legislation. So this particular wage legislation will be imposed by the government only. So when we talk about the minimum wage, so automatically this is the graphical representation that how you explain the minimum wage legislation. So if we talk about the diagram, the demand curve is downward sloping and the supply curve is upward sloping, which is SS and DD. So there is a minimum wage rate has been imposed by the government, which is above the equilibrium point, that is R. So when we talk about equilibrium point, that is R, so automatically that any particular wage rate which has been imposed by the government and fixed by the government will always be above the equilibrium point, which has been shown in a dots line, and that line, it's called the minimum wage line or minimum wage rate, which has been decided by the government. R is a equilibrium point, Q is the quantity demanded and supplied, and P is the original price line. So when we talk about the minimum wage rate, it can be shown over here that the quantity demanded has been declined or will become decreased. So when the quantity demanded will become decreased due to the wage rate has been fixed by the government, that means there is a situation of the surplus labor. That means there is exactly no particular jobs available, and the people who are willing to do a job are actually don't get a job. And that's the main issue where the quantity demand, it means the demand of a jobs are actually not available or decreased according to the time period, and as a result there is a fall in employment, which has been denoted by a point that is WQ, or which has been denoted by a difference of a point curves, that is WQ. So WQ stands a fall in employment rate. So why? Because the demand for a jobs actually is not available, and the people who are willing to work, they are not able to get the jobs, and it has been denoted by a difference of WQ. Minimum wage rate will also create a surplus of labor. That means the people who are willing or likely to work, they cannot able to find a job, and ultimately the surplus labor, the people are more, jobs are less, and that's due to the minimum wage rate has been imposed by the government, and the difference of the surplus is denoted by a point that is TJ. So this is, or surplus labor is also equal to a points that is TJ. So if we talk about the unemployed workers who are always being tempted or forced to offer themselves for the work at a minimum wage rate, will always below the floor rates, which is always below the actual rate. So such type of you can say inefficiencies has also been seen in the market, which always been begin to take place in it. So automatically, the minimum wage legislation, if ever imposed by the government in the market, and ultimately the workers are those who has to suffer, and they want to work actually at the actual rate, but due to the minimum wages imposed, they don't get a job according to their wage rate that on which they are actually willing to work in the particular factories. So this is the exact explanation with the diagrammatic presentation, as well as the explanation or the interpretations of the diagram which has been shown on the screen. So that is called the minimum wage legislation. And always be remember, when there is a surplus of any labor or of any demand or quantity supply, the whatever the particular wage rate or the prices is fixed. In case of the surplus situation, then any line which is being drawn above the equilibrium point, if there is any shortages or there is a price ceiling fixed by the government, then ultimately automatically that particular line will be drawn above, below the, not above, below the equilibrium point. So whatever the differences of the equilibrium point and the line which has been drawn out below the equilibrium point, that differences could be a loss, right? And any line which has been drawn above the equilibrium point, that particular line is called surplus. It could be the price floor, it could be the surplus of labor, it could be a surplus of revenue or gain. So this is all about the minimum wage legislation. So that's it for today, and I believe that all those sessions related to such particular program and course code will be defined in the lectures which has been given, which relate to all the blocks. Whatever the important topics has been covered will be really or highly helpful for your examinations. So till time, we look forward to more, you can say, the sections or the important, which is beyond, you can say, about this particular course code. We'll see in the next course codes which relate to the macroeconomics. So we'll see in that particular course code. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening. You can see and have patience to listen for the whole lecture. So thank you so much for listening and namaste to all.